few years ago, I was walking through Borders, and usually we think we're pretty familiar with these covers, right? You know what those are. Those are the Penguin classics. Apparently, I don't know. Um, but they're the famous block covers that you get here in the States, and you see all the classics. But occasionally, every once in a while, um, you'll be walking through and you'll find this title that you've never heard of before. And this is what happened to me with this book. So I had to pick it up. This was a number of years ago when I read it and bought it, but it's called Celestina, and it's by Fernando de Rojas. And this was actually published in, think, way before Shakespeare. This was published in 1499. Um, it's kind of like a novel, kind of play-like. I'll talk about that in the body of the review, but it's a really interesting little book. I'm going to talk about some of the spoilers too, so in case you're interested in reading it for yourself, um, be forewarned. Celestina is one of those sort of literary peculiarities that you might not have had the pleasure to be introduced to if you hadn't taken a course in maybe Spanish literature or something. I first ran across it in the Daedalus European Classics series, which has a lot of similarly obscure and wonderful stuff in it, like Georges Rodenbach and Gustav Meyrink. Other writers like that who usually aren't nearly as widely read as they are today. And I was pleasantly surprised when I ran across this under the title of a mainstream publisher like Penguin, translated by Peter Bush. Celestina is this local procuress and sort of alchemist and witch, mage kind of figure. And she makes a living of restoring the hymens of previously deflowered young girls so that they may be marriageable again. There's this rich noble man by the name of Callisto uh, who falls in love with a girl named Melibea, yet she doesn't love him back at all. It's completely unrequited. So he enlists Celestina, given her magical powers and everything, to fix this, and through some crafty manipulation, she eventually succeeds in convincing her to love him back. So two of Callisto's servants, named Parmeno and Sempronio, they promise to offer their own services to Celestina if she'll split Callisto's payment 3 ways. So Parmeno starts out by being honest and telling Callisto that Celestina is nothing more than a money-hungry crook, but eventually gives up when he sees how hopelessly in love Callisto really is. Once Celestina refuses to pay them, everything starts to go horribly, horribly downhill really fast. And what read for the first 2/3 as a sort of bawdy comedy turns into a bloodbath, kind of on par with Hamlet. The label tragicomedy seems to be especially appropriate since it kind of has equal measures of both tragedy and comedy. The plot is pretty fast-paced and pretty easy to follow. It's divided into 21 really short, heavily dialogue-driven chapters that read very much like a play. And it is very dramatic in that sense, even though it was apparently never meant to be staged. Throughout, the best advice is given through numbing, stultifying cliches, and this is usually true of Celestina. She's just full of cliches. You can almost open the book randomly and find her spouting some kind of cliche, though the humor of the character still manages to jump off of the page. Simone de Beauvoir, mistress of Jean-Paul Sartre, and wonderful philosopher and writer of novels in her own right, wrote a really beautiful description of Celestina in her book, The Coming of Age. She wrote this: "This was the first time that an old woman, Celestina, had appeared as the main heroine. In the traditional way, she was, of course, a bawd, but a bawd of dimensions quite unlike those of any character who had yet been produced. She was a former whore who had stayed in the trade because she liked it, a self-seeking, lewd, and intriguing old woman, and something of a witch as well, the leading, most active character in the play, though play, as I noted above, isn't quite the right word since it was never meant to be staged." She goes on, "In her are summed up all the vices that had been attributed to the old woman since classical times, and in spite of all her shrewdness, she ends by being severely punished. The French theater turned to this source of inspiration with less striking results. We find old bawds and prostitutes in Jodelle, Ode d'Eternité, and La Revue. The reader gets the feeling that when it was first published at the very end of the 15th century, like I said, 1499, Celestina was meant first and foremost to be a really savage critique of the reigning morality of the time. While it's lost a lot of its critical punch at a remove of more than 5 centuries, it's still fun, still really full of fun characters, ideas, and this bawd that de Beauvoir was talking about that makes it enjoyable and humane and lovable. Since it was written before most modern day genres had really gotten the chance to fully gel, I mean, even the novel really wasn't around 500 years ago as we know it. The style takes getting used to, and it can't be easily pegged down like we do more easily with Cervantes or Shakespeare, who in theme and style and are really both pretty heavily foreshadowed here. The novelistic aspect coming more from Cervantes, the dramatic aspect coming from Shakespeare. I can't read Spanish, so I can't comment on the original, but Peter Bush's translation, which again you can get in the Penguin Classics version of the book, is heavily recommended to anyone who's looking for a really unique, off-the-wall reading experience, quite off the beaten path. Celestina by Fernando de Rojas.